Terrific, terrific. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our Global Series program. This is a partnership between World Affairs of California and the Pacific Council of International Policy. I'm Dean Falk, and I'm a trustee of World Affairs. And we are absolutely delighted to have this short discussion today with Representative Barbara Lee and Abby Ginzberg about this new terrific documentary that opens tomorrow, Barbara Lee, Speaking Truth to Power. I know that all of you who are on this call, this Zoom, have had a chance to see it, but if you haven't seen it, go and see it, tell a friend. It is truly, truly moving. It's a wonderful, wonderful film. A very quick word about format, if I might. We're gonna do a couple short questions and have a kind of an intimate conversation. And then we will try to include you in the conversation. So please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. I know Barbara and Abby would love to hear from you. So with that, I think I'll just say I'm delighted to welcome our guests who need very little introduction. Abby Ginzberg, very prolific, award-winning documentary maker, and she has given us an incredible portrait, I think a very personal portrait of Representative Barbara Lee. It's biographical and it's personal, but it's also an incredible political journey. It's a journey, I think, of social movements. It's extremely, extremely timely. The documentary kicks off with a vote. It's amazing to think it was almost 2 decades ago that Representative Lee cast the lone vote against the authorization for the use of military force. And at the time, it was seen as a very courageous vote and maybe seen in, described in other ways as well. But history has shown that the courage of Barbara Lee is quite extraordinary and is something carried through in her career. So we are absolutely delighted to have this conversation. I think I'd like to start by asking Abby. We were saying that these days we sometimes say, are these ripped from the headlines? History doesn't always repeat, but sometimes it rhymes. And so, as we sit today and we have, we have so much going on around us in terms of social justice movement, the economic, implications and fallout from the global pandemic. And so, were you that prescient, Abby? How did you know? I mean, did you anticipate?
No.
How did you come up with, how did you manage to capture this moment in a bottle?
Okay, well, again, I don't think any of us, we may have foreseen that there would be problems when we were finally leaving Afghanistan, but I don't think anybody understood who was behind this film, that the film would be released the week that we are seeing the tragedy of what's going on in Afghanistan. So that, and I'm not sure that I would have foreseen or predicted, the amount of attention that Barbara's getting in the media, that her speech on the floor of Congress back in 2001 got, it's like we are kind of in the middle of a perfect storm that relates to why I made the film. I made the film because I wanted people to listen to that speech. I made the film because I wanted people to understand what it means to stand alone when everybody around you is saying, you're making the wrong choice. We have to support the president. So my motivations for making this film are kind of being reflected in the larger zeitgeist at the moment. And all I can say is I'm happy to have the zeitgeist reinforce the notion that people need to know what Barbara did 20 years ago. They need to know that she's been on the case for the past 20 years, working on trying to get the AUMF repealed. And she finally got it repealed in the House. And we may see it repealed in the Senate and actually signed by the president in the next few months, which would be amazing and very helpful as we move forward. But no, I was not prescient in this way. I just knew This was an important story for me to tell. This was an important story to put out into the world. This film could have been out in the world a year and a half ago if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So there is a way in which the universe works in mysterious ways. And here we are today with the film being launched tomorrow on iTunes and Amazon. And, and here we are talking about what Barbara did 20 years ago and what she is still doing. Around trying to make sure that we do as much of the right thing as we possibly can in Afghanistan to protect the Afghanis, as well as our own people who are trying to get out of the country. So all I can say is my prescience was really only about knowing there was an amazing story that I felt called upon to tell.
Fair enough. And Representative Lee, I will say, you are my representative. I voted for you. You are a very well-known, very well-regarded figure, but we didn't have as much, personal, as much as we talk about, public figures giving up their personal lives. You gave so much of yourself in this story, and your struggle, your personal narrative. And I just wonder if you'd be able to share, how did that feel? Did you, I don't know, maybe Abby is so good at teasing it out that she gets one little piece at a time. But how did it feel to give so much of yourself? Did you realize that it would become such an important way of telling a story to younger leaders? Was it painful going down memory lane? What was your experience in the making?
Yeah, Dean, well, thank you. Thanks for your kind remarks, and thank you for your vote. It's helpful. I'm proud that you're my constituent. But let me tell you, public figures, 98% of our lives are public, right? 2% is private. And so this was like pulling teeth. Abby somehow figured out how to get a glimpse of my personal life into the film. I came kicking and screaming. First, I don't want to do the film. And I would say I was probably her worst subject. It took her twice as long to do this film had I cooperated. Secondly, for those who know the astrological charts, I'm a Cancer, right? Cancers have this shell. And this little 2% of my private life, I go in my shell and I do not want anybody to know about it. And so Abby somehow cracked that shell just a little bit. And she knew what the bottom lines were and the parameters were. Don't go past what, for instance, I wrote in my memoir, or if you see that picture, don't even ask about it. You know what I mean? And she was pretty cool in doing that. But it didn't feel good to me until I realized that my life experiences have been brought to the public policy arena to hopefully change lives for people for the better. For example, just in terms of domestic violence, I carried, when I was in the legislature, at least 10 bills and carried the Violence Against Women's Act for California on domestic violence. And I had to do that. I mean, I knew I had to, but I hadn't thought about my personal experiences because I never talked about them. I didn't want anybody to know. Most women who are victims of domestic violence don't want anyone to know. But somehow Abby pulled it out of me. I think I wrote a little bit about it in the book. So there it shows up on the screen and saying, oh my God. But I hope it helps other women. And I hope other women, especially women of color and Black women, know that all the challenges that we have to deal with in life because of who we are, that hopefully they'll be able to see a glimpse of what I've had to deal with and recognize that with help and with support and with understanding how they ended up in this predicament, they can move on, they can conquer those battles. But it's not just about conquering those battles, those challenges for themselves. It's about changing the system and the policies and the programs and the funding priority so that other people, especially women, Black women, women of color, all women, they don't have to go through this stuff that I had to go through. So if that's the outcome and the impact of the film about that little 2% of my life, she got into about 50% of the 2%, which still is for me an invasion of my privacy. But she's such a good filmmaker that, I had to subject myself to that. But I'm just hoping it helps women along the way see that they too can do the things that they need to do to get out of circumstances or to change the world or whatever their goals are.
Well, picking up on that thread, Abby, was that part of your goal? I mean, it's such, obviously, you know, Barbara Lee has such a light that comes through in this documentary, but she's also, and you know, she's right here, so she's also a real bridge. It's extraordinary to see, you know, the John Lewises or the Ron Dellums, and she's a living bridge and a very active bridge to the AOCs and the Corey book.
Yes,
were you
absolutely.
trying to?
Yes, that I was trying, that was conscious. I don't think I went in knowing exactly how I was going to kind of manage, because I didn't know what I was going to get, quite frankly, about Barbara's personal life. So let's talk about the bridge part first, because that I was conscious of, that I was very committed to doing. She, you know, I mean, she is an important bridge. You know, one of the things you look for when you're making a film is what other little mini stories do you get to tell? Well, I knew I get to tell a little Shirley Chisholm story. So that immediately like goes into the, you know, the list of things that has to be in here. And I get to tell a Ron Dellum story. And I mean, I actually haven't said this in any other interview, but one of the real sadnesses for me in the course of making this film was that Ron was sick from the time I started making it and died before I finished, and could not be interviewed by me. He, you know, would call me every 6 months and say, Abby, I know you want me to do this interview, but I can't, you know, I'm not feeling well enough. So finding a way to put Ron in there, because you know, I know how important he was to the beginning and middle of Barbara's career, and because I have so much personal respect for him. So I just needed him in my film, period. And so we found footage that works and makes him feel alive in the film. You know what I mean? Even though we don't have an actual interview with him and talking about Barbara, which would have been glowing as well. Then we have there are two levels of the people that she's mentored. We have AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Lisa Blunt Rochester, Gregory Meeks got there at the same time she did, so he wasn't mentored by her. And every one of those women, you know, talks about how important it was to have her support as either as sort of somebody who was out there and they could look to feel the strength when they had to make hard decisions for themselves, or because of the specific advice she gave them at any given time. So that was absolutely conscious, you know, to make sure that I told that story. And then there's a secondary level of mentorship, which are the young people that Barbara gets to bring on every trip that she has done to the civil rights pilgrimage to the South. So you get to see these young kids, they're not kids anymore, you know, but young teenagers and young adults from Oakland coming into their own light on this civil rights pilgrimage. And they would not be there but for Barbara making sure that she has the right to bring them. And so that is, you know, it's like introducing these young people from Oakland to these historical places on the civil rights tour is critical. I mean, it's part of why any of us understand, you know, our connection to these places is because you go to Birmingham or you go to Montgomery or you go to Selma and you begin to feel the weight of history and the connection between the present and the past. So Barbara has done a tremendous amount of mentoring that I've been aware of, and I knew I needed to weave into this film. So that was all conscious. I want to say one other thing that I've learned. Okay, so Barbara didn't necessarily like the fact that her marriage was at the end of the film.
And I loved that. By the way, I don't want to say
what? Yeah, guys love that.
No, women love it too.
Humanized her in such a.
But I've got to say, the number of people that have thanked me for the way in which that was a moment of pure joy and celebration and love. Okay, so Barbara, you know, you can't trust your subject to tell you what goes in and out of the film. So I got to say, sorry, that's how I'm ending my film. That's it. And I feel like the feedback I've gotten just from you and from a million other Black women particularly makes me know that this needed to be in the film. So sometimes you're subject and you just can't see it, you know, the same way, and you got to do what you got to do, and she's got to have her reaction, and here we are. But I am very grateful. I mean, really what I have to thank Barbara for is that she let me film her wedding, because if she hadn't, I would have no footage. So there you have it. So it was, you know, it was because she trusted me at least that much that I actually got to film it and include it in the film. So that was very important to me. Barbara was not quite on board, but I just want to say the response of the audience every so often kind of pushes you up the hill and down the other side.
Well, I thought that there were, it seemed to me that there were themes running through the film, you know, because Representative Lee has been working on these issues so long. In some cases, she's been able to wait out, you know, push things forward until there's a change. In other cases, you mentioned the AUMF, she's waited 20 years and she's fought for 20 years until the system finally gives in. And, you know, I'm just an amateur, but in terms of the marriage piece, it was like, wow, this is a person who, if you have core beliefs, if you stay true to who you are, then anything is possible. And this lifetime always has wonderful surprises for us. And it's that core of optimism. That's what I took away, rather than just someone's, you know, personal life. I thought it dovetailed very nicely with those arcs.
Yeah.
Abby,
Can I say one other thing? You know,
please.
It's like there was so much more. I mean, there's a part 2 to this, which is Barbara's whole work on the international sphere. But what you don't want to do in creating a documentary is make it somebody's CV. It has to be a portrait. It has to be thematic. It has to be about the things that motivate you as a filmmaker to want to make this film. I mean, I had to, you know, spend 4 years of my life kind of putting all these pieces together. There's got to be a reason for it other than just wanting to say, and then this happened and then that happened. That's not interesting. It's not interesting to the audience and it's not interesting to me. And so the notion that there are themes and perseverance, I said, what are our themes? Perseverance, 20 years later, she's still fighting the AUMF fight. You know, resilience, as she would say, and still I rise, as Maya Angelou said, you know, another really important thing. And the Ayanna Pressley point about people closest to the pain should also be closest to the power, so that how we make legislation and policy based on what people have experienced in their real lives needs to be part of the discussion. And Barbara has a lot to say, as does Ayanna Pressley, as does AOC, as do a lot of the newbies in Congress, about why we have to rethink what we're doing around economic and racial policy in this country. So those are among the themes that I was drawn to at the very beginning.
Barbara, since I have to ask you, because the documentary makes a really interesting, has a very interesting scene about President George W. Bush in his State of the Union, picking up the initiative you championed with an AIDS relief measure for Africa. Just extraordinary moment and success, of course, for you and for others. But it's also an incredible bipartisan achievement, right? And also considering, and the point is made, considering that, you know, this is the same president that you sought to deny, you know, pretty much in the AUMF, his signature foreign policy priority. So I guess in this day and age, we are always asking from our wise leaders, what can we do to bring people together across the aisle, as you continue to do with AUMF, and we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. But what's the secret sauce?
Sure, Dean. And I think what we have to realize, wherever we find ourselves, happens to be in public life for myself, that people you oppose vehemently are not your enemies. And we all have this level of humanity that we've got to maintain. And so the example, I'm glad you raised the example with George Bush, because boy, I was like death on him in terms of marches, rallies, voting against a lot of what he wanted when there was bipartisan support. I mean, it was, but I never called him my enemy, and he knew that. And I had this idea for PEPFAR, President Emergency Initiative for AIDS. And I went to the meeting, first meeting, when he was elected, of the Black Caucus, and I had on my pen, beaded pen, AIDS pen, red ribbon, and I think it was a red ribbon, but it was a beaded pen, and he looked at it, and during the meeting, I told the chair then of the Black Caucus, Eddie Bernice Johnson, I wanted to raise HIV and AIDS with President Bush, and she said, okay, nobody else is, so you go on and do it. So I raised it with him, and suggested that made all the suggestions and wanted to talk to him further about it. He looked at Condoleezza Rice, and I think Colin Powell's in there, and he said, Condy, you and Colin, get on it. Let's see what we can do. And the rest is history. Then, and when I was meeting with him in the line, and Abby, in her brilliance, somehow she dug up that footage. I had never seen the pictures of me and him together talking. I gave him that pen and I explained to him, it was Ron Dellums was working then on HIV and AIDS and helping to raise money for women in Africa who needed funds to deal with their medicine and to deal with HIV and AIDS and care and what have you. So I gave him the pen, explained it to him, and told him what I wanted to do. So I didn't hear much from him, but until that December before the State of the Union. And I said, look, and I got the Black Caucus. I said, it's too quiet over there. I want everybody to sign a letter reiterating what I asked the president to do. And I wrote that letter, and every member of the Black Caucus signed that letter. And I think what happened in the White House was, oh yes, we need to rev this up. It's a good idea. And so they took it on. And when he said what he said in terms of everything we asked for in the letter, I felt really good about that, because I knew that had we not pushed, because other things had come up, we probably never would have gotten to that point, but also that I respected him and was cordial, and he respected me. And Ron always said, don't hit below the belt. He said, never hit below the belt. And so I just learned that lesson throughout. And I think today we have to understand, our adversaries, I mean, and Lord knows I have a bunch of them that I would like to call my enemy. A bunch of them. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do
sorry.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. And I'll just share finally this Shirley Chisholm story that didn't come into the film. But I about, when I was a student at Mills College and Shirley Chisholm's presidential campaign, she stopped her campaign for a while and went to see George Wallace, who was shot during the campaign. And I was furious, because here I was a young woman, first time involved in politics, first time registered to vote. And here's this Black woman who I adore, who's right on, goes to see this segregationist who I despise, because I know knew who George Wallace was. Shirley took me to town. I was ready to drop out of her campaign. And she told me, you don't know, I may be able to influence. He's a human being. He's going to be paralyzed. He's sick. Yes, I'm going to see him. Or I did go see him. And you need to learn a lesson about that. You never know what influence I may have had, but I had to just go see him as a human being who got shot and is very sick. I said, okay, so I stayed with the campaign. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, I met in Georgia, in Montgomery, Peggy Wallace Kennedy, George Wallace's daughter. And of course, she worked in Obama's campaign. She's created her own legacy of fighting for racial justice, right? We became really good friends. And I brought her to the Bay Area. We had a big event with her, the whole 9 yards. Peggy said, and I told her one day, and I had forgotten about this story. Just one day we were talking. I said, Peggy, I said, I couldn't stand your father. And I told her all the reasons. And she said, yeah, daddy was, she says, I try to, I didn't agree with him. That was my daddy, but I'm doing my own thing now. And he was wrong. I mean, she's very clear about that. And I told her about the experience with Shirley Chisholm. And she said, yeah, Barbara, she has a very Southern accent. I was with daddy at his bedside in the hospital when Miss Chisholm came to see him. And she talked about the whole conversation. And she said that was the moment her father began to look inward and understand what he had done. And when I was in Alabama, she was with me. They told the story about him coming to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in his wheelchair. Now I said too little, too late. I was with Caroline Kennedy then too that day, a couple of years ago when we talked about it. Too little, too late. But he rolled down in his wheelchair and apologized at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Dr. King pastored, for what he had done and for his misdeeds and what have you. And again, too little, too late. But he also, which Shirley told me, helped her with legislation with the Southern Dixiecrats. He would call some of his Southerners and say, Ms. Chisholm has this bill, for instance, on domestic workers and wants your help. So he would help Shirley Chisholm behind the scenes. And that is just like, oh boy, that story. And knowing Peggy now, we're really close. is just something that always have to have hope in the human spirit. And so I still have hope, even though there's some people around here and some that I don't want to even talk about because I'll get riled up. But so that's how I do it. And these are people who taught me lessons.
Those are important. Thank you. And those are very important lessons, and easy to forget and harder to implement when you feel very passionately about, helping people and so many initiatives. Abby, you mentioned, please.
I just have to, before I forget, just because it doesn't come up enough and it's so interesting to me. One of the things that's not in the film really, I mean, there's a reference to it, but around the PEPFAR thing, they were like in a deep freeze over the Bush administration. Josh Bolton said, they were terrified because they actually did want to do something based on Barbara pushing them, but they were terrified that if it got out before the State of the Union, that that the people who were against spending any money, and we're talking 15 billion, which in those days was a lot of money, they were just terrified if it got out, it would somehow get stopped. And so part of what they were doing over on the Bush side of things was trying to do it on the down low, so he could actually announce it. This is what Josh Bolton, his chief of staff, told me. So there was, everybody was maneuvering. Let me just say that. But it appears that this administration, or the Bush administration back then, had responded. They had heard the call from Representative Lee, and they were going to do something about it. And so, again, but it's like when you ask the question of sort of why does that make it into the film? It's because of what Van Jones says. Her relationship with George Bush should go down in the history books. First, she opposes him as the only person opposing him on 9/11, and then she gets him to do the right thing on HIV and AIDS. That's pretty remarkable for one person in a short period of time.
Abby, and let me we've saved over 20 million lives.
Yes. Okay.
20 million lives, and we're moving toward an AIDS-free generation come 2030. And that to me is just so important as part of the work that we've had to do, Democrats and Republicans. So I'm trying to keep it bipartisan even now as we speak.
But I think it also goes to the issue of you never know when you're going to have just enough of a window to kind of forge this kind of an agreement. It's like, had Bush not been open to doing PEPFAR, who knows how many people would have died, maybe 20 million more. So it goes to Barbara's both brilliance and abilities that this happened under George Bush's watch. And I just felt like that needed to be in the film.
And being values driven.
Yeah.
Because even people who disagree with you can understand when you are driven by values, and those values are, in many cases, universal values, helping other people. Right. Even, it may not be their top priority, but they know where you're coming from. And I think because of, yes.
And I just want to say, I don't know for what film or where I found this, but there is footage of George and Laura Bush working in an AIDS-related medical clinic somewhere in Africa long after he left the presidency. So this was kind of the real deal for him too. And, and so as a filmmaker, I wasn't trying to elevate a Republican president. I was trying to tell a story that happened to have been facilitated under a Republican administration. And it was like, okay, this is where it happened. Let's give credit where credit's due. So that explains a little bit of why I was so interested in this.
Now, it's been said that really good documentaries use setting as a character. And there's no doubt in my mind that in this film, Oakland, the East Bay, the 13th District, it lives and breathes. I think it's said in the documentary, A Tale of Two Districts, right? And sort of that, I guess
we're driving along because we've got the homeless camps here and we've got gentrification across the street.
Right. At the same time that you've got, as you say, gentrification, this new, a certain type of prosperity that's entering. And also overlaid on that, I think the point is beautifully made, that it's the leadership on so many of these progressive issues that Barbara and others are able to marshal. How is it it is all of these things at once? Some people will say it's also ungovernable, but how do you reconcile that? So I guess my question is, How were you able to breathe life into that character of place? But also, and the hardest question, which is easy for me to ask, Barbara, what is the future? What does the future hold for this vibrant area region?
Who do you want to have first?
Okay.
Barbara.
Let me just say how Abby, and then she'll tell you about her brilliant filmmaking, but she understands intersectionality and how everything is linked to something else. And so she was able to, in my opinion, put together how I do my work. And I can see that, for instance, childhood poverty in my district is one of the highest in the country. And so why would I be fighting for preventing people from being evicted from their homes? I mean, these are the same people who have children living below the poverty line. Why would I fight for an increase in SNAP benefits, which we finally are getting? It's because these same people who have these children, these same mothers who don't have money for childcare, they need an increase in SNAP benefits, and they need to not be evicted. So Abby was able to kind of put it together, all together. And I think that's one of the really compelling parts of the movie. But the future, I think, for me and my district, I say my district, if we can solve the problems in my district, it's a microcosm of America.
Absolutely.
We have so many unsheltered people. We have so many kids who live below the poverty line. We have so many people who are hungry. We have so many challenges in my district. And yes, it is a tale of two districts. When you have rent, a one-bedroom apartment costing like $2,500, how does anyone on the African-American average household in Oakland is $47,000, $48,000? How do you afford that kind of rent? One-bedroom apartment, you just can't. And so it is a tale of two cities. So we have to have some equity in all of our policies, federal, state, local, and some closing the gaps. We have to close some of these gaps. For Black people, it started 401 years ago as it relates to the Middle Passage and slavery. We still have a lot of police misconduct. We still have kids who have access to guns. We still have all of the issues that the country is faced with. Yet on the other hand, we have we're probably the greenest district in the country. We started a green corridor in my district years ago with Tom Bates. We have the Cypress Mandela Training Center, which has been for years training young people. We've gotten federal funding earmarks for that, training young people to do solar roofs and put solar panels on in terms of building construction. And so we have the beauty of what can be done, the opportunities and what's there. If only we could come to grips with funding priorities and making sure these programs are brought to scale, and making sure we listen to young people, because it's a very young district, about what they see as their future in terms of protecting our planet, climate change, in terms of equity and justice, in terms of equality with our LGBTQI community, with our immigrant community, have a large immigrant community. And so I think if we can address the issues of all of our communities, which have different challenges and issues, but some that are, and very unique challenges, but overall, it's about equity and it's about justice. And if we could do it in the 13th Congressional District, the rest of the country can. So I always say, finally, we're the most enlightened district in the country. And I have to push to make sure that we do the right thing. And I think our local elected officials are brilliant. They're progressive. They want to do the right thing. And so we just have to have the resources and the movement, to scale to make sure everything goes in the correct direction.
I thought you were going to say it's the wokest district.
She said that.
It is the wokest district, and the right wing tries to use what I said in a speech at Netroots conference, which Webster Dictionary, if you look in Webster Dictionary under woke, it has me defining it in a speech. And so, of course, when the right wing started saying that, I said, oh yeah, it is the wokest district, but I don't know if people would attach me to those people, which I don't want them to. So yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think what I would say, Oakland was always meant to be a character in the film. So thank you for noticing that. And another point I would make, Barbara's our secret weapon on issues of inequity and how do we resolve this and so on. So it's like, and I was so glad to have this opportunity to go to Milwaukee with Barbara and Gwen Moore, who I have tremendous respect for. It's like, it is these African-American representatives who represent very challenged districts that we better be looking to for the solutions, because they are tied tightly to their districts and they know what their districts need. And, we may be in a moment where there may be a little bit more money available to help these districts, kind of rise up a little bit. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that. And what I would say about Oakland, I think that it's a remarkable district in a lot of, it's not just Oakland, it's Barbara's whole 13th district, but I think it is a remarkable district. But really what I think is that her relationship to her constituents is somewhat unique. One of her sons says, my mother comes home every weekend to her district. And that, that's been true for many, many years. So that's why she has such a strong relationship with her constituents. And so it's not, it wasn't an aberration when the constituents were organized to come out and support her after the 9/11 vote. It's like people wanted to come out and say, we stand with you. You are not alone. You should not be hiding in your apartment in Washington. We're here for you. And so I think one of the themes that I was really interested in throughout was, Barbara's in the streets with her constituents, and you see her at that Dia de los Muertos, and you see her with the firefighters having a birthday party, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She is, and Elihu Harris says it. It's like people see her as a friend as well as their congressperson, and that's very unique, I think. And I feel like that's part of the role modeling that I want done as a result of people getting to see this film. It's like everybody should be having that kind of a connection to their constituents. And, Barbara's done it for 20 plus years. So I'm just hoping that this motivates more people to spend more time kind of drawing, the connections.
I have a question. It's as much a comment from Tony that says, Representative Lee has been such an amazing advocate on HIV/AIDS in America and across the world. Her repeal act is so important. Thank you for your continued leadership.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's nice.
Thank you.
And I have a question. I will paraphrase that Bill from Sacramento has asked, how does the US intelligence community get it so wrong with 9/11 and now Afghanistan? And I guess you're in some ways, because of your prescience and your forethought 20 years ago, you're the perfect person to ask. Is it a failure of intelligence, or is it a failure? Is it a judgment issue? What are we struggling against?
Well, I tell you, a couple of things. We're going to have a deep dive, the Intelligence Committee oversight, my subcommittee on the funding, Armed Services, Foreign Affairs. So we have to have a clear, a very robust investigation from all committees. I don't think anyone can say or know right now. The intelligence evidently either was flawed, or we didn't get the right intelligence, or in fact, it was just, and again, this could bear out, could not bear out. Maybe the Afghan security forces were collaborating with the Taliban for a while. We just don't know that. And it's important, though, to know and recognize that the corruption has been enormous. The special Inspector General for Afghanistan, just came out with a recent report, and he said that there never was, and I hope you all get a chance to read that, because he said that there was never a context in Afghanistan to win. He said even a mediocre, and we didn't have even a mediocre understanding of the Afghan environment. So bottom line is, who knows right now, but I think it's going to be a convergence of a lot. But the point of the SIGAR, that's what we call him, the special investigator and inspector for Afghanistan reconstruction. Over the years, I've worked with him. And over the years, he has put forth these reports saying US tax dollars are being stolen. The corruption was unbelievable. So where did all our money go? Where did your money go? So we have to ask those questions. $2 trillion. Come on, trained 300,000 Afghan security forces. So something went wrong. And I think it starts with 20 years ago when our country decided to not only invade, but to occupy Afghanistan, thinking there was a military solution. Finally, hopefully, people have realized there is no military solution in in Afghanistan. And had we stayed there and had President Biden kept the troops there and inserted more, because he'd have to send thousands more, 20 years from now, we'd be probably in a worse position than what we're in now. And so understanding that we have development diplomacy, which my subcommittee funds, and defense, which I have a $62 billion budget. The defense budget is $740 billion. So we've got to rebalance and reimagine and kind of constitute our policies and framework for foreign and military policy in the future. So we've learned a lot of lessons. We'll learn more, but believe you me, we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Thank you very much. We've only got a little bit of time left. I have a question that's asking about the September 14th gubernatorial recall. If you have any wisdom on or particular thoughts on the process, or.
My wisdom is vote no on the recall. Can you imagine if you had any of those Republicans as governors? They do not reflect the values of my district or of California. It's an all mail-in ballot. Please vote no on the recall. This has national implications. I mean, can you imagine women's rights, our reproductive freedom here in California? Can you imagine all of the issues, our budget priorities, our climate initiatives, all of the initiatives around our children, our COVID, our business community? Vote no on the recall. That's my advice. And that's my plea.
Appreciate it. Well, I guess we only have a couple of minutes left. We're very grateful. It's a terrific discussion, and I'm excited to see the documentary out there and continued. It's getting, as you know, a lot of terrific and tremendous press and attention, and it's thought-provoking. It's educational. Please, Abby.
Okay, so I just want to tell people, so now I'm talking to you all out here in the San Francisco World Affairs Council. We need your help in telling others about this. You've had a unique opportunity to hear from, Barbara Lee personally here and from me, and we need you to tell others where they can see the film. So tomorrow it will be available for streaming for people who do not want to go to a theater on both Amazon Prime and on iTunes. You'll have to pay a little bit for it, but not much. And it will be at the Roxy, the Shattuck, the Sebastopol Rialto, and in LA at the Laemmle. So for people who are willing to think about going to a theater, I really recommend it on the big screen. It looks great. So anyway, so that is my, my request would be, oh, I just disappeared here. My request would be that people tell their friends to go pay attention to this film and, try to see it either by streaming it or by going to a theater in the Bay Area where it will be playing. And I am grateful to you if you will do that for us, because that is how people hear about documentaries.
And it is worth it. It's worth your time. It's worth your effort. It's beautifully done. It's got timely messages that are every bit as relevant in this moment. I would say on behalf of the World Affairs Council and our partner, the Pacific Council on International Policy, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, our audience in Northern California, in Southern California. A very special thanks to Representative Barbara Lee and filmmaker Abby Ginzberg. So great.
I take a minute to just thank everyone, because I know my constituents are the wokest and the most enlightened in the country, but I just have to thank them for their love, for their support, for their friendship. And also I want to thank the World Affairs Council, because part of my work has been about trying to bring the world into our community. And so bringing foreign and domestic policy together. And I hope our young people have a chance to see this, because it's up to them to really understand that what affects one affects all. And I think this pandemic has shown that. And so we're a small planet. We've got to protect it. but we also have to work together as a global family to do that. And so I just want to thank my district again for being the most enlightened and the wokest. Thank you all for those who voted for me. I really thank you for that. And Dean, you did a great job with this, and I really appreciate your kind remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for leaving us with that.
And and just thanks to the World Affairs Council for inviting us. I mean, it's a pleasure to have been here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. See you next time.
There's a lot of love for you in the chat.
Oh,
There's a lot
thank
of
you.
love. I know.
I love you.
This is a love wall.
There's a lot of love here.
Because it's a rough place.
It's a rough road out there.
The rough road is tough. This is tough stuff. So the love is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Bye. Thank you.